Hey guys, I'm Gruz, and today I'm going to take you through 5 incredible versions of the classic game Super Mario Bros. Some of these versions were officially made by Nintendo, but others were projects by dedicated fans who reverse engineered the original game's code, reworking it to play on completely different systems. Systems where it probably shouldn't be, like this one. This is Super Mario Bros. For the Sega Genesis. That just sounds wrong. So what's this all about? Well, back in 2010, a person named Megadrive released a version of the original Super Mario Bros. For the Sega Genesis or Megadrive console. This project was possible thanks to a fan-made breakdown of the game's code by someone named Doppelganger. Doppelganger's work was the foundation for many of these fan-made ports. Super Mario Bros. On the Genesis is remarkable because the Nintendo Entertainment System and the Sega Genesis are built very differently, especially with their CPUs. These CPUs have different instruction sets, so even though what is essentially the Super Mario Bros. Source code is sitting right there on GitHub, porting the game from the NES to the Genesis would still be a lot of work. Megadrive used a special tool that automatically converted about 75% of the game's code, and developed an emulator to mimic the NES's hardware functions on the Genesis. The game looks a lot like the original Super Mario Bros., but you might notice something different about the music. It's the familiar Super Mario theme, but it has a unique sound thanks to the Yamaha sound chip in the Genesis. Kinda resembles an organ. All of the iconic Super Mario tunes were brought over to the Genesis hardware, which you may or may not enjoy the sounds of here. Regardless, it's a good reminder that what you're playing Super Mario Bros. On is not an NES. Aside from the music, playing this version feels pretty much like the original game. Overall, it's an impressive port, and it's especially interesting to see it running here on the hardware of Nintendo's former competitor. Back in 2012, someone named ZeroPage made a post on lemon64.com, a site focused on games for the 1980s Commodore 64 home computer. They announced their project to create a Commodore 64 version of Super Mario Bros. Based on the Doppelganger disassembly. Over the following years, ZeroPage shared updates about their progress, and finally, after 7 years, the game was completed and released to the public. The project was titled Super Mario Bros. 64. It's a genuine adaptation of Super Mario Bros. For the Commodore 64, a system that many would argue isn't naturally well suited for this particular game. When it was released, it caught a lot of attention online, and it's rumored that Nintendo stepped in to have the download links removed. This port is quite impressive. The graphics, although not as bright and colorful as the NES version, translate well to the Commodore 64, offering a charming retro computer game aesthetic. The audio is also noteworthy. The music and sound effects were implemented to mimic the sound of the NES on the Commodore 64 hardware. All of the original music and sound effects are included, and they've even been enhanced in some ways, like with support for dual SID chips, which is the sound chip used in the Commodore 64. This game supports the unusual configuration of 2 of these sound chips, giving you the option of having the game's music in stereo. The gameplay closely mirrors the NES original. It performs similarly, but you might notice some slowdown when the screen is crowded with enemies. The C64 can just about handle this game, but to address the slowdown, this game is compatible with hardware accelerators like the Super CPU, or even the Commodore 64's big brother, the Commodore 128. The game just needs a little speed boost here and there to keep the frame rate solid, but overall it never gets to the point of being unplayable in my opinion. Another thing I find impressive about this port are the additional controls. Usually, C64 games only use a single button, but this game supports 2-button controllers, allowing a playstyle similar to using an NES controller. But it also offers traditional joystick controls where pressing up on the stick makes Mario jump, a common setup for games on the Commodore. Overall, it's such a fantastic port, one that I highly recommend. Well, after exploring these fascinating fan-made ports, it's time to see how Nintendo has revisited their classic game. They've ported Super Mario Bros. Multiple times, and I'm not just referring to the straightforward eShop emulation ports. Over the years, Nintendo's revisited the original Super Mario Bros. In various ways. One of the most renowned ports is the Super Mario All-Stars collection for the Super Nintendo. Although it's based on the original NES code, this version feels less like a direct port and more like a remaster. The graphics in this version are stunning. They completely reimagine the original game's visuals in a style that's bright and welcoming. The refined look includes captivating backgrounds and a lot more details in the levels, such as grass or snow on the ground platforms, and sparkling stars in the nighttime levels. The color use is exceptional, and the new backgrounds enhance the sense of being in places like the Mushroom Kingdom or an old underground shaft. Released in 1993, this game came at a time when Nintendo had the Super Mario universe pretty well figured out. In fact, All-Stars was one of the last true 2D Super Mario games, coming out between Super Mario World and Super Mario 64. Along with the revamped graphics came revamped sound. Both the sound effects and music have been wonderfully remade, highlighting the impressive capabilities of the Super Nintendo sound hardware. The gameplay features subtle yet noticeable tweaks from the original, like starting with 5 lives instead of 3. But despite these changes, the game maintains the overall feel of the classic Super Mario Bros. Super Mario All-Stars is a timeless collection that's held up great over the years. It's the kind of game you can revisit every few years and still find incredibly enjoyable. Nintendo has a history of bringing the original Super Mario Bros. To its portable systems, and back in 1999, they released Super Mario Bros. Deluxe for the Game Boy Color. This was a fantastic version of Super Mario Bros., absolutely packed with content. Now the first thing you'll probably notice is how big everything is here. Instead of shrinking everything down to fit the small Game Boy screen, this version maintains the original size of the sprites, but to compensate, it limits the visible portion of the stage. The graphics in this version have come right from the 1985 original, with some enhancements like animated water and lava. There's also a level map in this game where after you beat each stage, you can see a little cutscene of Mario move into the next area. The sound is also very faithful to the NES version, with some added sound effects for things like skidding, bouncing on the jumping board, and when Lakitu tosses a spiny egg. The game physics feel a bit tighter in this version, which is beneficial since the reduced screen size allows for less reaction time to upcoming obstacles. It really helps out in this game being able to react just a bit faster. Now the real highlight of Super Mario Bros. Deluxe is its extra content. Besides the classic 1985 Super Mario Bros. Mode, there's a challenge mode where you have to collect red coins and Yoshi eggs to unlock awards and medals. Additionally, you can unlock Super Mario Bros. For super players, which is essentially the lost levels. There's also a You vs. Boo mode, where you have to race Boo through a series of obstacle-filled levels. It's a lot of fun. The game also features an album where you can unlock pictures and print them using the Game Boy printer, as well as a toy box section containing things like a calendar and a fortune teller. Super Mario Bros. Deluxe is absolutely packed with content, and I highly recommend checking out this one if you haven't already. In 1986, just a year after the release of Super Mario Bros., the game was brought to arcades as part of the Nintendo Versus system. This arcade version, known as Versus Super Mario Bros., initially seems identical to the NES release. However, after you start playing it, it slowly deviates from the NES version, and pretty soon you realize that this is not the same game you remember. It's a sneaky version of the game, designed to lure you in with familiar stages, but it's intentionally designed to be very challenging as a means of consuming more quarters in the arcades. For For example, some levels are completely reworked to be more difficult, and others are directly taken from the lost levels, which it turns out weren't so lost after all. Adding to the challenge, the game limits the number of extra lives players can obtain. Notably, Nintendo altered level 3-1 to patch out the infinite lives glitch by replacing Koopas with Goombas. In fact, the entire game contains only 4 extra lives. Additionally, the arcade machine settings could be adjusted by the operator to change various aspects like the starting number of lives, the required number of coins for an extra life, and even the speed of the countdown timer. Despite its difficulty, I consider Vs. Super Mario Bros. A must-play for die-hard fans of the 1985 original. Nowadays, you can find this version on the Nintendo Switch eShop. I bet a lot of people ran into this on the eShop and had no idea it wasn't the game they thought it was. It's a much different game, and I played through the Switch version recently and found it incredibly enjoyable. It even includes the arcade settings for adjusting the difficulty. If you're someone who's mastered the original game and is looking for a new challenge, Vs. Super Mario Bros. Is an excellent choice. It's tougher than the original NES game, but not quite as difficult as Lost levels. Definitely worth checking out. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like on it. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more retro content like this. Thanks for your time today, guys. Goodbye.